Good morning, everybody. Our first talk of the day is Developing Flask Extensions by Rachel Sanders. She's a developer at LinkedIn and is an organizer of the PyLadies in San Francisco. So please give her a warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. I want to apologize in advance for my voice. I have caught the con flu like a couple days early, so I will try my best not to sneeze and deafen all of you. But I'll try to give you a warning. So there we go. Anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Developing Flask Extensions. Before we get started, a little bit about me. I am a PyLadies San Francisco organizer and founder. And when I'm not doing that, I'm an engineer and technical lead at LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, I code in Python all day, every day, and that's because LinkedIn's internal stack is Python. Python and Flask, to be specific. Woo, yes! So this talk came out of something I did at work for my team. I needed to write an extension for them. And I really struggled with getting something reasonable together because there's not a lot of documentation out there on writing extensions and doing this kind of work. So it turns out that Flask is designed to be extended, and it's actually, I think, very, very straightforward. And so that's my goal of this talk, for you all to walk out of here thinking that extension development is just as straightforward and easy as I think it is. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to do a really, really quick introduction for those of you who haven't worked with Flask or aren't familiar with it. I promise it'll be very quick. It'll be like 2 minutes long, and we'll talk about what it means to extend Flask. But we're going to spend most of the talk on a case study on this extension that I wrote. And we'll talk about how it works and the implementation of it. It's a very simple extension. It was like 100 lines of code, and I've condensed it down to quite a bit. So once we see that very basic extension, we're going to talk about where you can go from there for non-trivial examples, for that kind of thing. So we'll go sort of like a case study of other extensions that are good to learn from what I think. And then finally, we'll end with questions. Okay, so I thought of a number of ways to do an introduction to this, and the best way I could come up with was just to show you a working Flask application. This is a working Flask application. If you pip install Flask and run this in a file, what you'll get is a dev server running on port 5000 that if you load localhost 5000 in your browser, what you'll get is the words, "Hello, San Dimas, hi," printed there. And okay, so if you're coming from like the Django or Rails world, you'll look at this and go, that's great, it's a nice hello world function. Okay, where's the rest of it? Where's my database? Where are my forms? Where is my admin interface? And Flask doesn't have any of those. It is a micro framework. And this is pretty much what you get. You get routes, you get controllers, it ships with the templating language Jinja, it has some session and cookie stuff, but what you see in the slide is pretty much what you get. And that's actually on purpose, because the idea of Flask is to build a good foundation for all applications. Everything else is up to you or extensions. And this is Armin, who is the creator of Flask. Flask is at heart a toolkit. You use it to build HTTP things. And the core library is purposely kept very small and focused to be good at doing that. And that means that most of the stuff you need as a day-to-day application developer is all in the extension ecosystem. So learning how to write extensions is a key part of learning how to write Flask. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to extend Flask. So this is the same Hello San Dimas Hi application. And this slide went by really fast a minute ago. But if you look at line 3, that app equals Flask name, it's actually doing an awful lot. We use a method on it called route to map the root URL to that hello function. And I don't know if you've ever had to do any CGI programming, which I had to do back in my bad old Perl days, but those 3 lines of code are eliding over a ton of magic. We're doing inbound routing, we have some string that we're somehow translating into like an HTTP response, and so there's a lot of stuff going on there. And in the last one, we're actually kicking off an entire dev test server. So the takeaway is app is the heart of Flask. That magic app object, which I'm going to call it, that is where all of the functionality and what Flask is. So it is the core. And when we talk about extending Flask, what we're really talking about is changing that app object and modifying it. Like I said, Flask is designed to be extended, and you can change this app object in like lots of ways. You can say, hey, when a request comes in, let me have it first so that I can look at it and send my own response if I want to. Or after the application is done looking at it, let me have it before it goes out the door so I can add cookies, I can rewrite the response, whatever. I can also give my end user developers more resources. I can point app to where other things are, like I can tell it where other filters are in Jinja. I can extend Jinja for them. I can programmatically add in routes, blueprints, which are Flask's way of organizing code, or assets and things like that. I can wrap the app in middleware, and I can even monkey patch it, and we will see an example of that late in the talk. Okay, that is all super, super, super generic. So let's look at a real example here. Okay, so I'm the team lead for a small kind of internal workflow-y, build-y kind of tool thing. And we wanted to move to continuous integration. We were deploying every 2 weeks. We wanted to deploy every day or every other day. So no one gets the wrong idea. The main site, the main LinkedIn site that you all use has had this for days. And it's like, we are internal, and we are sort of off on our own a little bit. And we're all friends. We all try to make sure we're all working in the same direction. But sometimes my little team is going off this way, and the other 1,000 developers of the company are going the other way. So we try to be consistent, but sometimes we're a little bit different. So if it sounds like I'm talking about a 12-person company instead of a 5,000 one, that's why. So anyway, so we needed a way, when you moved to continuous integration, we needed a way to be able to commit and deploy code that was not ready for users to see. So I wrote an extension to do that. I wrote an extension to turn parts of the app on or off based on configuration. I did not make up this idiom. It's called feature flagging, therefore Flask-FeatureFlags. So the actual extension that you can get on PyPI and download from GitHub is about 100 lines of code, and I could not fit that on a slide. So instead, I have shrunk it down to about 15, maybe a little less lines. And I've done that by cutting out all the functionality, all the error handling, and all the paranoia, and anything I would want in an actual production library. So don't judge a book by its heavily edited Reader's Digest version. So anyway. OK, so what I want to do is I want to talk about using this extension from the end user's point of view. So if you were to download this extension and use it, let's talk about how that would work first, and then we'll go into the implementation details of it. OK, so this is our old friend, the Hello San Dimas High application. I've cut out the dev test server for space reasons. OK, so extensions are just modules. They're like modules like anything else. So you import them. Import Flask-Ext FeatureFlags as feature. Flask gives you this little indirection thing, so the name of the extension is actually Flask_FeatureFlags, but I think this is the supported way of doing it. And I'm importing it alias to feature because I can't say the other one. So I take that, and then I instantiate an object called FeatureFlag, and I feed it that magic app object. So from the end user's point of view, this is all they have to do to configure this. That's it. And now they can start using it. OK. The second thing I want to have is a module-level function called isActive. It has one argument, which is a string. That's the name of the feature. Features are just strings. And it's supposed to return true, the feature is on, or false, the feature is off. So if you run this, if you say if feature is active PyCon, hello PyCon, else hello San Dimas High. If you run this, what you'll actually get is hello San Dimas High, because I haven't actually defined any features yet. So let's talk about how we would do that. So in vanilla Flask, there's really only one place to store configuration like that, and it's called in the app.config. On that magic app object, there's a property called config, which is mostly like a dictionary, and it stores config key names and values. So we're going to call our config feature flags, and it itself will be a dictionary. So the names of the name of the keys are going to be the name of the feature, and the values will be Booleans. True, the feature is on. False, the feature is off. So this is how you would turn a feature on. App config, feature flags, name of the feature, true. If I run this, I will get hello PyCon. OK, so this is great for the Python, like the app developers like me, but I want my front-end developers and my web devs to be able to use this in the Jinja layer as well. And to do that, I'm going to use a thing of Jinja called a template test. And this is what a template test looks like. If PyCon is active feature, hi PyCon, else hello Sandemus hi. Active feature is the name of the template test, and it's like a function. It will get PyCon as an argument, and it's supposed to return true, the feature is on, or false, the feature is off. Basically identical to the isActive thing we just did. So if we're going to put on our project manager hats for a second, and we're going to write a spec, there's only really 3 things we're going to do. One, we're going to store the feature flags in the config. We're going to store we're going to have a Jinja template test called active feature, and we're going to have a module function called isActive. So I switched the order of the last 2 for reasons you'll see. OK, so let's get going. Let's actually see some actual code here. A fair warning, there is a giant wall of code coming up. I know a giant wall of code can be hard to read for those of you back in the cheap seats, but I will do my best to talk through it. But if you have a laptop, feel free to open it to bit.ly/giant wall of code, which is a link to a gist of everything I'm going to talk about. So, and if you have that, feel free to open it and look at pictures of cats instead of, the rest of the talk. So bit.ly/giant wall of code. Ask your neighbors if you forget. OK. So remember when we said that Flask extensions it involves changing that app object. So we need a callable. Extensions are just callables. They can be functions. They can be objects. In practice, they're almost always objects because they're almost always non-trivial. So ours is going to be an object. So this says class feature flag, inherits from object. So like all objects, it has a double underscore init method. And we allow the user to pass that magic app object to us. But if you notice, we're actually making it optional. And then we're going to do something kind of weird. We are going to, if we get an app passed to us, we are immediately going to pass the buck over to another method called initApp, which is not optional for app. OK, so why are we doing this? This is to support something called application factories, which is a really, really common Flask idiom. We use it at LinkedIn to do a number of things. So it's a function or something that generates that app object for you. The reason why I'm splitting these 2 things is I want my extension to be able to be instantiated and run without having that app active yet. Application factories are used for things like testing, so we may have many apps being generated. And I want to be able to feed them to that extension without having to create and destroy it every single time. So Armin, actually, the creator of Flask, actually suggests this is how you structure your extensions. And that's why I wanted to show it to you. So init is all of your extension level instantiation, and initApp is all the changes you're making to the app. Most extensions you'll see out in the wild are structured like this, so that's why I wanted to show it to you. OK, so let's actually write some real code and not boilerplate. The first thing we wanted to do was store our features in the config. So I said the config is mostly a dictionary, and here's a case where it's not. So this says AppConfig is set default, because we are all professional developers, and we set same defaults for our app. So our default for our feature flag is going to be just an empty dictionary. So that's all we're going to do. So if you remember a couple slides back, I sort of merrily did AppConfig feature flags PyCon equals true. And I can't usually do that in Python. Python doesn't let you make a key and a subkey without throwing a key error, I think. And so that's why I could do that, is because I set a default here. And so to make our lives easier, we're going to write a method called InConfig, which takes one argument, which is the feature name. OK, so if you've noticed, I'm not actually storing the app anywhere in this extension. There is no self.app equals app. And that is on purpose. I want this extension to not have that saved within it. I want the app to contain all of the state and all of the things like this. So that's because application factories and other things like that. So yeah, so in order to get, but I need to get the app, right? Because I need to get it in its config. And so I'm going to use an idiom of Flask. Flask saves me here by having something called current app. Current app is a global. When an application context is live, or basically a request is live, Flask sets current app to be whatever magic app object is currently running and currently controlling that request. So that's how I can get to it here. So here, I'm going to say this current app.config feature flags. I'm going to look for my config. I'm going to see if the feature is there. If it is, I'll return the Boolean. And if it's not, we'll return false. OK, number 1, done. Jinja template test. Just to remind you what that looks like, it looks like this. If PyCon is active feature, hi PyCon, else hello Sandeem is hi. So it turns out we can add a template test to Jinja or a template test to Flask in one line of code. There's a whole API for Flask, and this is one of the hooks that it has. And it looks like this, app.addTemplateTest. It has 2 arguments. One is a function reference that we want it to call, so we'll call InConfig. The real extension has a much nicer way of doing this, but whatever, it's fine for now. InConfig, and the name, the second one is the name of what we want to use in the Jinja layer, so active feature. OK, so I did this, I committed it, and all of my Travis CI builds went red. And I was like, huh, weird. So I looked at the API, and I was like, I'm using it right, weird. Can anybody see the problem here? Yeah. Noon version 10, I was running version 8. This is something I want to talk about. As application developers, you deal with one version of Flask. As extension developers, you deal with as many as you care to support. And so you'll be doing this a lot. Flask is under rapid development, and it has, and .10 specifically, rewrote a lot of the API and added a lot of nice things to do this kind of stuff. So it's great, but you have to be really careful. So what I ended up having to do is actually do has_adder on the app and check for that API call. And because that's the standard going forward. I want to use that going forward. But if it's not there, then I need to fall back to editing basically dictionaries directly. I will say that Travis CI is amazing for stuff like this. And if you're curious, you can look at the GitHub for my Travis CI config and see how I did it. I can test every version of Python I support versus every version of Flask I support, and it all works great. OK, template test, done. So the last one is the isActive module level function. So just to remind you what that looks like, if feature is active PyCon. OK, so this is going to be a little confusing. I hope it was clear. What I'm doing is not as important as how I'm doing it. The little example I'm going to give you is a little bit contrived, but I wanted to show you part of this kind of thing. So let me see if I can explain. OK, this is a module level function. It is not the extension object we created earlier. If you notice on line 5, we throw it away, basically. It doesn't have, the module function is active, has no idea where that is or how to get to it. But I need it to be able to call that InConfig method. So you might look at this and go, why don't you just save it and like pass it to the isActive function or something? And that's just gross. I mean, it would work here, but like if I had multiple files, I'd have to start importing things, and I get circular imports, and gross. But what I do have is I can get to the current app, and we already saved something in there already. So the short version is we can save ourselves in the current, in the app. So if all that wasn't clear at all, this is the takeaway part. So this is what I want to show you. Flask has a special registry for extension. It's called app.extensions. The key is the name of your extension, and you can store anything you like in here. In this case, I'm just going to store myself. I'm just going to go along with the ride for the app. You might say, well, wait a minute. I thought we didn't want to hook those two up together, right? I don't want to save the app with the extension because I want the extension to be able to run on any app it gets, be able to instantiate once and run it. But the app is the heart, and we're already modifying it. We're already doing things to it. So it's OK to sort of for the extension to ride along with the app. So that's what we're going to do. And that means writing that module level function is super easy. It's actually one line, which I've split here into 2 just for readability. So it says feature flagger. I look in the current app, because that's the global. I can get to it. I look in its extension registry for our stuff. And that's just, myself is just sitting there. So I call the InConfig like anything else. So That's all we do. All right, we are done. We have stored things in the config, we have a template test, and we have that isActive function. All right, to summarize, what did we learn? We learned use init app because application factories. We learned how to set config defaults. We learned about calling Flask hooks with that add template test. And we also learned that .10 is a trap, and we have to be careful about what things are available. And we also learned how to use the extension registry to get to our extension later. OK, so I hope you're all saying, oh, extension development, so easy, so straightforward. Great. Why have I never done this before? And then, wait a minute. My use case is way less trivial. I have the database. I have other stuff I need to do. So since there's not a lot of documentation on this out there, I wanted to show you sort of a sampler of extensions that I think are good and that are good ones to learn from and crib from. The first one I want to talk about is Flask Debug Toolbar. It's a great example of a highly complex extension. It was originally written by Michael Van Tellingen, which I hope I have his name right, and it's currently maintained by Matt Good, who I work with at LinkedIn. It is a port of the Django debug toolbar. So in your Flask app, what you'll get is a sidebar with a whole bunch of panels to it. It shows you, HTTP headers that are active, what templates were rendered, what variables are passed to those templates, and it'll show you your SQL Alchemy queries and any sort of logging and things like that. This is a little hard to read, but this is a screenshot off of GitHub, basically. So, and I've given you no other context, but I think this is actually pretty readable. If you can't see it, look at the slides later. But so the top line says init app, so it's using that same split as we already saw, so it's init app. And then the first two lines are iterating through some things, and it's setting AppConfig set default, so it's just setting the app default. Then it checks a couple configs for paranoia purposes. And then the middle says debug toolbar load panels app. It's actually passing the app to sub-extensions, so it can do more configuration. And then the rest of it is just calling hooks. App before request, call me when the request starts. App after request, call this method when the app ends, when the request ends. Teardown request. So the one over there says app dispatch request. It's actually monkey patching the dispatch request to be able to view that, to handle that view and do other things like that. So it's actually monkey patching it to some extent. And the last two lines are just adding URL routes and blueprints so it can do CSS and JavaScript and things like that. So other great extensions, Flask CSRF is a CSRF protection library. And so it's a great one to look at if you're doing request processing or you're handling cookies, because it does things like that. Like, it does a lot of that sort of stuff. Flask admin. Flask admin is kind of a port of the the Django admin interface. It integrates with SQL Alchemy. It has blueprints. It has static files. It does a lot of things like that. It's another good one to look at. It has, I think, a slightly different approach to using SQL Alchemy than Flask Debug Toolbar, so you can kind of compare and contrast between the two. And then finally, Flask Classy, which I love. I love this extension. It adds class-based views. So you can have an object with get, post, put, delete methods that will map those HTTP methods directly to those things. So you can create an API really, really easily, and it's pretty fantastic for that. OK, with that, I'm done. So thank you so much for watching. If you need to reach me, I am here. So thank you so much. And I didn't cough once. Yes. All right. We have 5 minutes for questions, so if anybody would like to pick my brain, then come up to the microphone, and I will try to remember to repeat your question, which I've been told to do. Or if I've stunned you all into silence, that is fine, too.
Can you give me a sense for within LinkedIn, how much do you use extensions versus blueprints for your own code rather than things that are being produced externally?
It really depends. So my team is very workflow heavy. So we have a very, very big and very workflow enterprisey kind of thing. So we use blueprints extensively, and we build our own extensions extensively. We have a couple that we've done. In terms of the other things, so Python is generally used for tooling and internal deployment and architecture and other stuff like that, as well as internal apps. So mostly blueprints are probably used more. We do have a few extensions like that. I've tried to open source all the ones we have. So it sort of depends on the use case. We have such a wide range of stuff. That's why we use Flask, to be honest, is because it's so flexible. Did that answer your question? OK. Awesome. All right, cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.